Chapter 1. The Weight of the World. The rain wasn't rain, not really. It was a viscous gray sludge, saturated with the metallic tang of iron and the sickening scent of pulverized stone. It plastered itself against the fractured remains of what had once been the city of Viridian, a testament to the relentless crushing force that now gripped the world. The mountains, once jagged and proud, were folded like bruised fingers, and the valleys had become yawning chasms, swallowed by the earth's unnatural growth. I, Kalen, a feather knight of Skyreach, huddled deeper into the crumbling archway of the Temple of the Azure Dawn, pulling my worn sky-blue cloak tighter around me. The fabric, once a symbol of noble bearing, was now stained with mud, and the unfortunate casualties of the collapse, mostly desperate refugees, and the occasional, agonizingly slow descent of a Skyreach soldier who'd misjudged their footing. My hand instinctively tightened around the grip of my Aegis hook, a polished obsidian blade designed to latch onto surfaces, a useless tool in a world increasingly devoid of solid ground. Beside me, Borin Stonehand, a mountaineer from the Iron-Bound Orcs, grunted, sharpening his axe against a jagged piece of what was once a cobblestone. He was a brute of a man, scarred and powerfully built, more comfortable in the bone-chilling heights of the mountains than in this suffocating, collapsing world. This ain't rain, Kalen. This is the world remembering its own size. Malphas the Heavy is squeezing us all into oblivion. Borin's words were grimly accurate. The war of the high ground, already a brutal and senseless slaughter, was being fueled by a terror far more profound than strategic ambition. The laws of physics themselves were warping, governed by the malevolent will of Malphas the Heavy, a monstrous entity imprisoned within the void anchor, a gigantic obsidian shard that had inexplicably lodged itself at the planet's core. We were not fighting for territory anymore. We were fighting for survival, and against a foe that didn't understand the concept of surrender. The war had begun with a predictable, savage scramble Skyreach, obsessed with their perceived divine right to command, attacking the Iron-Bound Orcs who controlled the few remaining, naturally stable high peaks. The Aether-Wing Elves, ever aloof and concerned with the preservation of their ancient forests, had predictably intervened, attempting to mediate a futile gesture considering the inherent animosity between their people. Now, it was a chaotic, spiraling descent into oblivion, punctuated by the screams of the dying and the grinding of stone. We hadn't joined the fighting, not directly. We were investigators, scouts, those tasked with uncovering the rot beneath the surface of the conflict. We'd been tracking rumors of a shadowy organization, whispers of betrayal carried on the wind, and the panicked cries of refugees. And today those whispers had led us to this, a ravaged city, and a cache of undeniable proof. The three of us, Kalen, Borin, and Lyra Winddancer, an elven winddancer from the Aether-Wing clan, had stumbled upon a hidden chamber beneath the ruined archives of Viridian. It wasn't a place anyone expected to find anything, let alone evidence that could shatter the fragile alliance that held the kingdoms together. Inside, stacked neatly in reinforced crates, were bars of lead gold, shimmering with an unnatural, oppressive weight. Around them lay scattered schematics, diagrams of the Levitation Engines, intricate devices designed to counteract the rising gravity, and most damning of all, records of payments to a clandestine network of engineers. The Anchor Priests, High Lord Theron, the human ruler of Skyreach Warlock Vorlog, an Orcish outcast, who'd achieved terrifying mastery over Gravity and Lyra's sister, the Gravity-Weaver, Alara. They were the architects of this catastrophe, deliberately sabotaging the Levitation Engines, not for strategic advantage, but to ensure that only those strong enough to bear the increasing weight, the heavy-borne, as they called themselves, would survive. "They're playing a long game, Kalen," Boren growled, hefting his axe. "Manipulating the very fabric of reality for their own twisted ends. They ain't just trying to kill us, they're trying to reshape the world in their image." Lyra, who'd been meticulously examining a schematic of a particularly complex levitation engine, nodded grimly. "The lead gold, it's not just currency. It's, conduit show. Conduit. They're feeding Malphas, bolstering his power, making him more substantial." The discovery had been chilling, terrifying, and perhaps most importantly, illuminating. We understood now that the war wasn't just about survival, it was about a desperate, impossible task, neutralizing the source of the catastrophe. The thought of facing an entity like Malphas, a being that had effectively become the embodiment of the planet's despair, filled me with a cold dread. But looking at Boren's grim determination and Lyra's focused intensity, I knew we couldn't afford to falter. The weight of the world, it seemed, rested not just on our shoulders, but on the crumbling remains of a civilization. Chapter 2. The Echo of the Void, the Rain. A greasy, viscous downpour of solidified gravity hammered against the battered walls of the Skyreach watchtower. Kalen, the Feather Knight, adjusted the intricate weave of his Aegis hook, the shimmering metal catching the weak light filtering through the storm. Boren, his face a mask of grim patience, sharpened his axe with a rhythmic rasp, each stroke punctuated by the hiss of falling water. Lyra, ever the pragmatist, continued to pore over the lead-gold schematics, her brow furrowed in concentration, a single flickering torchlight illuminating the desperate calculations she was making. "The scale of this operation is staggering," Lyra finally announced, her voice tight with a mixture of horror and grim fascination. "They weren't just targeting the levitation engines, they were systematically dismantling every attempt to understand the core's instability. They've erased decades of research, destroyed entire libraries of geokinetic knowledge." Boren grunted. "Sounds like the work of a man obsessed. A man who thinks he can impose his will upon a god." He spat a glob of gray sludge onto the floor. "Vorlag and Alara are more than just traitors, they're playing a game with forces they don't comprehend." Kalen shifted his weight, the Aegis hook humming faintly. "We need to understand what Malphas wants. Why would a being of pure gravity, a cosmic anomaly, be influenced by the ambition of 3 human lords, an Orcish Warlock, and an Elven Gravity-Weaver?" Lyra stopped her calculations and pointed to a cluster of symbols etched onto one of the lead-gold bars. "These aren't mere markings, Kalen. They're echoes. Fragments of a forgotten language, the tongue of the primordial void. It appears the anchor priests weren't just feeding Malphas, they were communicating with him. They're not simply amplifying his power, they're exploiting a sympathetic resonance." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the tower, stronger than any they'd felt before. The rain intensified, morphing into a torrent that threatened to buckle the stone foundations. Boren swore, bracing himself against the wall. "It's getting worse. Malphas, he's responding." Lyra frantically adjusted her calculations. "The rate of mass increase is accelerating. The moon, it's being drawn closer. The lead sleeves were a desperate measure, a containment field, but it's failing. He's actively shaping the planet around himself." The source of the tremor led them to the central chamber, a vast, circular space dominated by the ruins of a colossal levitation engine. The air shimmered with residual energy, and the metal groaned under the immense pressure. Scorch marks blackened the floor, testament to countless failed attempts to harness the engine's power. It was here, amidst the wreckage, that they found the final piece of the puzzle, a meticulously crafted obsidian shard pulsing with a sickly purple light. This is a void stone," Lyra whispered, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface. "A fragment of the void itself. The anchor priests were using it to amplify Malphas' gravitational pull, to essentially bind him to the planet's core." As she spoke, The purple glow intensified, and the air thickened with a palpable sense of dread. The walls of the chamber seemed to press in, and a low, guttural hum filled the air, the sound of Malphas stirring. "We're running out of time," Borin said, his voice grim. "They're not just trying to crush us, they're trying to force us into their vision. A world dominated by weight, by the relentless pull of the void." Suddenly, the Aegis hook in Kaelin's hand flared with blinding light. A holographic projection shimmered into existence, depicting a terrifying scene: the Skyreach capital, once a bastion of human ingenuity, collapsing into the earth, its citizens crushed under the unbearable weight. Then a ghostly figure materialized within the projection, a towering obsidian-skinned figure radiating pure gravitational force. "Malphas. He's showing us the future," Kaelin realized, his voice strained. "He is offering us a release." Lyra understood instantly. "They want us to accept the inevitable. They want to accelerate the collapse, to hasten our destruction and prove their heavy-born superiority." As if in response, the ground beneath them shifted violently. The obsidian shard in Lyra's hand pulsed with unbearable heat, and the chamber filled with a suffocating pressure. The air crackled with chaotic energy, mirroring the terrifying images projected by the Aegis hook. The weight of the world, it seemed, was no longer simply crushing them, it was actively trying to consume them. "The coup of the rising," Kaelin declared, his voice resolute. "We need to strike now, before Malphas gains complete control. Before he drags the moon down with him." He gripped his Aegis hook tighter, his eyes fixed on the shimmering projection of the collapsing world. For Skyreach. For the chance to defy a god's design. Chapter 3. The coup of the rising. The air in the Skyreach command citadel, once a testament to human engineering, now thrummed with a tangible dread. The holographic projection of the crumbling capital remained stubbornly fixed on the screen, a constant, nauseating reminder of their impending doom. Kaelin, the Feather Knight, a warrior sculpted from granite and determination, paced before the assembled council, a mismatched collection of Skyreach strategists, weary Iron-Bound Orcs, and grim-faced Aether-Wing Elves. Lyra, the Orcish mountaineer, a mountain of muscle and raw instinct, sharpened her obsidian axe with a practiced hand, her eyes scanning the swirling projections, while Alara, the Wind Dancer, the Elven Gravity-Weaver, attempted to stabilize the residual energy crackling around her, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. "The Aegis hook is feeding us information, not just visions," Kaelin announced, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. "Malphas isn't simply showing us what will happen, he's demonstrating how. He's layering the devastation, amplifying the effect. It's as if he's anticipating every countermeasure, every attempt to disrupt his control." The realization hung heavy in the chamber. They'd been operating on the assumption that Malphas, the High Lord, the Orcish Warlock Vorlag, and the Elven Gravity-Weaver Seraphina were merely misguided zealots. But the holographic display, pulsating with agonizing detail, revealed a terrifyingly calculated strategy. They weren't just accelerating the collapse, they were meticulously orchestrating it, focusing the planet's burgeoning mass like a lens, magnifying the destructive potential. "We have been focused on containment, on bolstering the Levitation Engines," Lyra grunted, testing the edge of her axe against a reinforced stone pillar. "But Malphas isn't interested in containment. He wants victory. He's using the chaos to push us towards the brink, to prove his heavy-born dominion." Her voice dripped with disdain. "The Aegis hook isn't showing us defeat. It's showing us temptation." Alara, usually a picture of serene focus, was visibly shaken. The ley lines, they're becoming increasingly unstable. Malphas' influence is radiating outwards, distorting the very fabric of gravity. If we continue down this path, we risk a complete collapse, a cascading failure that will consume us all. She attempted a complex weave with her hands, trying to reinforce the diminishing flow of magic around them. But I can't simply fix it. I can only delay the inevitable. Kalen stopped pacing. The coup of the rising. It's no longer simply a plan. It's a necessity. We need to strike with overwhelming force, disrupt their network, and sever their connection to the anchor. A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. The coup of the rising, born from the discovery of the lead gold caches and the horrifying truth of their betrayal, had always been a desperate measure. But the Aegis Hook's revelations transformed it from a gamble into a brutal, calculated assault. Well, hit them in 3 waves. Kalen outlined his strategy. Wave 1, a combined assault on the Citadel's outer defenses. The Iron-Bound will provide the brute force, the Mountaineers will navigate the collapsing tunnels, and the Wind Dancers will utilize their gravity manipulation to disrupt their defenses. Wave 2, once the Citadel is breached, will focus on neutralizing the traitorous magic. Vorlag will be the priority. His ability to amplify gravitational forces is the most dangerous. Elara, you and your Wind Dancers will need to sever his connections to the ley lines. Wave 3, secure the Anchor Priests themselves. A coordinated strike, utilizing the Aegis Hook to disable any protective magic. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled warriors. This won't be a glorious battle. It will be a brutal, desperate struggle for survival. We're facing a god, not a king. We need to be precise, ruthless, and utterly unforgiving. Suddenly, the Aegis Hook flared again, the holographic projection shifting to a different scene, the Skyreach fleet, crippled and burning, sinking beneath the waves. The realization slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. Malphas wasn't just trying to destroy their cities, he was actively dismantling their defenses. He's diverting the currents, Lyra roared, slamming her axe into the floor. He's using the destabilization to sink our ships. He's turning the very oceans against us. We have less than an hour, Elara cried, her voice strained. The ley lines are already collapsing around the Citadel. If we don't act, we'll be consumed by the void before we even enter the fray. Kalen raised his hand, silencing the rising panic. Enough. The time for discussion is over. The coup of the rising begins now. For Skyreach. For the future. Let us become the tide that washes away the Anchor Priest's corruption. With a roar, he charged towards the command console, the Aegis Hook held high, a beacon of defiance in the face of a collapsing world. Do. Chapter 4. The Coup of the Rising. The air in the Skyreach Citadel pulsed with a frantic energy, a desperate hum of interwoven magic and steel. The holographic projections, once a calm study of the battlefield, now flickered with the terrifying evidence of Malphas' insidious manipulation. Kalen, his face grimed with exertion and etched with a terrifying focus, barked orders, his voice a honed blade, slicing through the rising tide of panic. The Aegis Hook, a weapon of shimmering silver light, was his anchor in this storm of impending doom. Mountaineers, to the east gate. Disrupt the flow of the hydraulic pumps. We need to flood the lower levels, create chaos. Feather Knights, reinforce the defensive perimeter, prioritize the shield barriers. Lyra, I want you to scout the outer walls, look for any signs of enhanced gravity fields. Elara, maintain the ley line stabilization, but understand it's a temporary measure. We're fighting a wound in reality. The response was immediate, a symphony of coordinated action. Orcish mountaineers, clad in scarred, bone-reinforced armor, crashed through the crumbling corridors, their axes a brutal counterpoint to the precise movements of the Feather Knights. Well, the Citadel, once a beacon of Skyreach military might, was rapidly descending into a maelstrom of controlled destruction. Lyra, a whirlwind of motion, zipped across the battlements, her eyes scanning the ravaged landscape, occasionally letting loose a volley of disruptor arrows aimed at any shimmering distortion in the air. "I've got something," she shouted, her voice tight with urgency. The currents they're responding to a rhythmic pulse. It's emanating from the central spire where the High Lord's chambers are located. Kaelin's jaw tightened. Malphas is amplifying his influence. He is trying to use the ley lines to control the very fabric of the Citadel's defense. Elara, focus all your power on disrupting that pulse. It's a priority target. Elara, a slender figure radiating an ethereal blue light, moved with agonizing slowness, her hands tracing intricate patterns in the air. The ley lines around the citadel, already frayed and shimmering, began to writhe violently under her assault. The holographic projection shifted, showing a grotesque visualization of the High Lord's chamber, a swirling vortex of raw gravitational energy, feeding directly into a massive obsidian-like device that pulsed with a sickly green light. "It's overwhelming," Elara gasped, her face pale. "Malphas is weaving his magic with a malice I've never encountered. He's not just manipulating gravity, he's feeding on it." Suddenly, the ground shuddered beneath their feet. A massive wave of water, summoned by Malphas' control of the ocean currents, smashed against the citadel's seaward walls, sending debris and terrified soldiers cascading into the churning depths. "The ships!" Lyra screamed, pointing to the holographic projection. "He's breached the defense grid. The Iron-Bound fleet is being ripped apart." Time was collapsing around them. The citadel's structural integrity was visibly weakening, and the weight of the collapsing world pressed down with increasing intensity. Kaelin knew they were running out of time. He turned his attention to the High Lord's chamber, directing the mountaineers to create a breach in the defenses. "This is it," he said, his voice grim. "The coup of the rising. We've spent weeks observing, planning, waiting for this moment. We know his weakness, his reliance on the lead sleeves. The Aegis hook won't simply stun him. It will sever the connection, expose him to the full force of his own creation." A surge of energy pulsed from the Aegis hook as the Feather Knights, led by the grizzled veteran Borin, breached the final barrier. The chamber was a horrifying spectacle. The High Lord, encased in his lead armor, was a shimmering silhouette against the pulsing green light. His face was a mask of distorted arrogance, a testament to his corruption. "You cannot comprehend the glory I wield," he roared, his voice echoing with the chilling power of Malphas. "This world will be reshaped in my image." Kaelin raised the Aegis hook, aiming it directly at the High Lord's chest. The silver light intensified, bathing the chamber in an unbearable brilliance. A piercing shriek echoed through the citadel as the lead sleeves began to crack, the enchanted armor dissolving into shimmering fragments. The High Lord, stripped of his protection, let out a final agonizing cry as the unleashed gravitational force crushed him beneath his own weight. A collective gasp swept through the citadel as the High Lord's body collapsed into a swirling vortex of dust and debris. The pulsing green light vanished, and with it the rhythmic pulse that had been controlling the currents and bolstering Malphas' power. "The pulse is gone," Elara whispered, relief washing over her. "We've cut off his lifeline." But the victory was short-lived. The holographic projection shifted again, revealing a new threat, a shimmering obsidian sphere hovering above the citadel, emanating a wave of raw, unbridled gravitational force. The Gravity-Weaver, it appeared, had anticipated this. She was prepared, and far more dangerous than they'd imagined. The tide had turned, and the coup of the rising had only just begun. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Singularity. The air, in the citadel of Viridian, once thick with the suffocating pressure of Malphas' influence, now vibrated with a chaotic, discordant energy. The obsidian sphere, dubbed the gravitic echo by the hastily assembled research teams, pulsed with a malevolent gravity that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of the structure. It wasn't merely amplifying Malphas' power, it was actively feeding off the residual gravitational distortions, growing with each terrifying beat. Kalen, still trembling from the High Lord's demise, tightened his grip on the Aegis hook. The silver weapon felt strangely warm against his palm, a faint echo of the Aegis hook's initial purpose, to channel and redirect power. Now, it felt like a conduit for a storm. The Weaver's preparations were unsettlingly thorough, he stated, his voice strained. She didn't just anticipate a countermeasure, she anticipated our entire strategy. Beside him, Borin Stonehand, the Orcish mountaineer, spat on the ground, a ragged, guttural sound. Elves, always with the weaving, thought they were too busy dancing with the wind to plan for a god's rage. Borin, despite his gruff exterior, possessed a surprising analytical mind. She used our confidence against us. The rift gates deliberately left open. The rift gates, ancient elven constructs meant to subtly manipulate localized gravity fields, had been a key component of the Aether-Wing's defense. The Weaver had allowed them to flicker to life, subtly drawing power from the surrounding zones, amplifying the gravitic echo's instability. Now, they were pulsing with a sickly, violet light, spitting out fractured shards of distorted space. We need to sever the connection, Ilara, the Wind Dancer urged, her movements precise and fluid even in the face of such overwhelming power. Disrupt the ley lines feeding the echo. We know she channeled the raw power of the anomaly into them. Stopping that flow is our only chance. A chorus of activity erupted across the citadel. Human engineers, bolstered by Orcish mechanics and elven geomancers, frantically worked to reinforce the crumbling walls and redirect the chaotic energy flows. But the Weaver's influence permeated everything. The mechanisms sputtered and seized, the geomantic wards flickered and failed, and the very stone seemed to resist their efforts. Suddenly, a deep resonant hum filled the chamber, emanating not from the echo, but from the heart of the Weaver's former laboratory. A vast, cavernous space previously dominated by intricate gravity-weaving machines. The violet light intensified, coalescing into a swirling vortex that began to draw in loose debris and even the horrified faces of the assembled forces. "She's feeding it!" Kalen shouted, raising the Aegis hook defensively. "She's converting our efforts against us." The Weaver, or what remained of her, was no longer a graceful figure. The residual gravitational forces, amplified by her own desperate attempts to control them, had warped her body into a horrifying parody of her former self. Her skin was stretched taut over a skeletal frame, her eyes glowed with an incandescent green light, and tendrils of raw gravitational energy pulsed from her fingertips. "You cannot comprehend the beauty of control," she rasped, her voice a brittle echo of its former resonance. "This world was meant to be sculpted, to be shaped. Your chaos will only hasten its demise." Borin, seizing a salvaged fragment of a null zone furnace, a device designed to instantly negate gravitational fields, charged forward, unleashing a blast of concentrated negative gravity. The blast struck the Weaver's form, momentarily disrupting the swirling vortex, but the effect was fleeting. The Weaver simply absorbed the energy, intensifying her own power and sending shards of distorted space rocketing outward. Ilara, leveraging her innate connection to the wind, created a localized anti-gravity field, attempting to push the Weaver away from the citadel. But the Weaver retaliated, unleashing a wave of focused gravitational force that slammed into Ilara's field, collapsing it with a silent, agonizing shudder. The Wind Dancer was thrown back against a wall, momentarily stunned. Kalen, recognizing the imminent danger, adjusted the Aegis hook, channeling its power into a concentrated beam of silver light. He aimed for the Weaver's core, the point where the gravitational energies converged. The beam struck with blinding force, but the Weaver simply shifted, flowing through the attack as if it were water. Then, Borin did something unexpected. He tossed the furnace fragment, not at the Weaver, but at the pulsing violet rift gates. The fragment embedded itself within the mechanism, bathing it in a wave of negative gravity. The gates sputtered, convulsed, and with a final, sickening crack, shattered, releasing a torrent of contained gravitational energy that slammed directly into the Weaver. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Weaver shrieked, a sound that tore at the very fabric of reality and began to unravel. Her form dissipated, not with a violent explosion, but with a slow, agonizing drift upwards, pulled relentlessly by the restored natural gravity. As she vanished into the void, the gravitic echo shuddered and collapsed, its obsidian surface cracking and crumbling into dust. The citadel held its breath, waiting. The air remained thick with residual energy, but the oppressive pressure was lifting, slowly, tentatively. The world, it seemed, was beginning to breathe again. Chapter 6. Echoes of Release. The silence that followed the Weaver's dissolution was almost as unsettling as the agonizing pressure that had gripped the citadel for weeks. Dust motes danced in the shafts of returning sunlight, illuminated by the fractured remains of the gravitic echo, a monument to betrayal and a chilling testament to the unnatural forces unleashed. Kalen, still gripping the Aegis hook, lowered the silver beam, the residual energy tingling in his fingertips. Boren, covered in gray ash and grime, stood beside him, a grim satisfaction etched on his scarred face. "Unexpected, wasn't it?" Boren rumbled, his voice hoarse from shouting over the last chaotic surges of the Weaver's power. "Didn't think a glorified furnace shard would be the key to undoing a feat of such refined manipulation." Elara, her face pale but resolute, approached cautiously. "The rift gates," she said, her voice laced with a cautious awe. "They weren't simply conduits for the Weaver's power. They were amplifying it, feeding it into her core. It was a brutal, elegant trap." She ran a hand over the jagged edges of the shattered mechanism, tracing the faint violet veins that had once pulsed with corrupted gravity. The Weaver understood the fundamental laws of this world Boren. She merely perverted them. The air still crackled with a faint residual distortion, a ghost of the Weaver's influence. The three heroes, human, orc, and elf, stood together, a fragile alliance forged in the face of annihilation. The sight was jarring. A feather knight, a mountaineer, and a wind dancer, united against a shared nightmare, a testament to the precarious beauty of cooperation. "We need to reinforce the citadel's shielding," Kalen stated, his gaze sweeping over the damaged defenses. "The shockwaves from the Weaver's demise have destabilized the ley lines. We're vulnerable. The Sky Reach engineers have been working tirelessly." Lord Valerius, the Sky Reach commander, arrived, his face grim. "But the damage the Weaver's influence has poisoned the very stone. We need a solution that doesn't rely solely on brute force. Something resonant." Boren stepped forward, a flicker of an idea in his usually stoic eyes. "The null zone," he said, his voice low. "I noticed a trace of it in the Weaver's armor. The lead sleeves. We stripped them off, but the residue, the negative gravity field, imprinted itself on the Citadel's foundations." "You're suggesting we replicate the conditions that destroyed her?" Elara asked, her brow furrowed. "That's dangerously close to inviting another disaster." "Not replicate," Boren corrected, gesturing towards the shattered rift gates. "Neutralize eyes. The Weaver wasn't just manipulating gravity, she was disrupting it. We need to create a localized zone of utter absence, a place where gravity simply cannot exist, and then use that void to absorb the residual distortion." The idea, initially met with skepticism, began to gain traction. The alternative, patching the Citadel's defenses with increasingly unstable, gravity-infused stone, was rapidly becoming untenable. With Valerius' resources, they began to construct a miniature null zone, utilizing salvaged components from the Weaver's armors and channeled through a network of carefully calibrated runes, a combination of elven geomancy and Orcish forged craft. As the null zone took shape, a shimmering sphere of dark energy contained within a cage of reinforced obsidian. Kalen noticed something. The energy signature isn't stable, he reported, his voice tight with concern. It's fluctuating, mirroring the Weaver's initial manipulations. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered. The citadel groaned, a low, resonant vibration that spread through the stone. The null zone pulsed violently, and the violet light within its core intensified. "It's feeding on itself," Ilara cried, pointing to the swirling energy. "The Weaver's essence, it's still present. She's trying to reclaim her power." Borin immediately adjusted the flow of energy, but it was too late. The null zone spiraled out of control, releasing a wave of negative gravity that slammed against the citadel, threatening to tear it apart. The air shimmered with distorted space, and for a terrifying moment, the weight of the world seemed to double, pressing down with unimaginable force. Just as the structure groaned under the strain, Kalen shouted, "Ilara! The Aegis hook! Use the residual light. Amplify the counterfield." Ilara, understanding instantly, channeled the silver energy from the hook, focusing it into a concentrated beam that collided with the chaotic energy of the null zone. The two forces clashed with a blinding flash, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hang in balance. Then, with a final shuddering pulse, the null zone collapsed, consumed by its own instability. The violet light vanished, and the oppressive pressure lifted slightly. They had averted disaster, but the encounter had revealed a terrifying truth. The Weaver's influence wasn't entirely gone. It lingered, a fragmented echo of her power, waiting to be awakened. And in the depths of the shattered rift gates, a faint violet shimmer remained, a chilling reminder that the fight for the world's balance had only just begun. Chapter 7. Echoes in the Stone. The silence that followed the collapse of the null zone was heavier than the crushing gravity that had threatened to consume them. The citadel of the Aether-Wing, once a beacon of shimmering crystal and intricate clockwork, now bore the ugly scars of near-annihilation fissures snaking across its walls, the air thick with the metallic tang of disrupted magic. Kalen, Ilara, and Borin stood amidst the chaos, their faces grim, the weight of their shared victory pressing down on them. "It's fainter," Ilara said, her silver eyes scanning the shattered remains of the rift gates, now pulsating with a subtle violet luminescence. "The Weaver's echo is fragmented, diluted by the raw energy we unleashed. But it's still there, like a ghost clinging to a tombstone." Borin, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his focus lens, analyzing the energy signatures. The amplification we achieved with the Aegis hook wasn't enough to eradicate it. It merely suppressed it, contained it within a localized distortion. And those distortions, they're growing, propagating outwards. Kalen, his feather arm heavy with the memory of the near catastrophe, gripped the Aegis hook tighter. The High Lord's actions weren't just about power, they were about controlling that echo. He was actively trying to feed it, to allow it to grow stronger. A chilling realization settled upon them. The lead sleeves hadn't simply protected the anchor priests, they were conduits, channeling the Weaver's residual energy, amplifying its influence. The very armor they'd stripped off the High Lord was a grotesque extension of his treachery. Suddenly a tremor ran through the citadel, not of the collapsing world, but something else. The violet shimmer within the rift gates intensified, coalescing into a swirling vortex of energy. From the vortex emerged a figure, not corporeal, but formed of pure violet light, a miniature version of the Weaver, trapped within a cage of shimmering energy. It writhed, a silent scream echoing in the intensified distortion. "By the ancestors!" Borin gasped, his voice laced with fear. "It's reacting to our presence. It's learning." The miniature Weaver pulsed with renewed vigor, projecting tendrils of violet energy towards them. They instinctively raised the Aegis hook, unleashing a concentrated burst of silver light, but the energy dissipated harmlessly against the Weaver's defenses. "We can't simply blast it," Kalen shouted, parrying a surge of energy that threatened to overload his focus lens. It's feeding on our attempts to suppress it. We need to understand its nature, its vulnerability. Elara, her movements fluid and intuitive, stepped forward, extending her hand towards the vortex. I sense that it's not malice, not exactly. It's a desperate clinging to existence. It's fractured, like shattered crystal. It doesn't want to harm us, but it doesn't understand that it's consuming itself. As she spoke, an image flashed through her mind, the Weaver's final moments, the agonizing process of her essence being absorbed by Malphas the Heavy, the horrific compression of her being within the Anchor Priest's lead sleeves. The lead sleeves, she gasped. They aren't just conduits. They're fragments of Malphas. The High Lord deliberately imbued them with the Weaver's essence, creating a parasitic loop. The Weaver's energy is being consumed, and the Anchor Priest is actively feeding it to strengthen the connection. Boren immediately began formulating a counter-strategy. We need to sever the connection to disrupt the loop. But a direct attack will only empower it further. We need to introduce a counter-element, something that will neutralize Malphas' influence within the lead sleeves. Kalen, his gaze fixed on the swirling vortex, suddenly pointed to a strange, pulsating vein of obsidian stone embedded in the citadel wall, a relic unearthed during the construction of the rift gates. The Stone of Null. Legend says it absorbs all forms of gravitational energy. If we can harness its power, as he spoke, the miniature weaver instinctively recoiled from the obsidian, its violet light flickering violently. Elara seized the opportunity, channeling the remaining energy from the Aegis Hook into the Stone of Null, focusing its power on the vortex. The violet light within the rift gates shattered, collapsing in on itself with a final, echoing pulse. The miniature weaver vanished, but the violet shimmer remained, now contained within the Stone of Null, a dark, pulsating heart of gravitational negation. It's contained, Boren said, a note of relief in his voice, but it's not gone. We've merely bought ourselves time. The echo remains, dormant but present. And Malphas, he's still growing. Kalen, Elara, and Boren looked at each other, the shared weight of their discovery, the insidious nature of the betrayal, the terrifying potential of the Void Anchor, a stark reminder that the fight for the world's survival had just entered a far more dangerous phase. The coup of the Rising had succeeded in lifting the physical burden, but it had also unleashed a new, more subtle threat, one that threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality. Chapter 8. The Echo in the Stone. The days that followed the coup of the Rising were a frantic dance of assessment and reconstruction. Skyreach, battered but unbroken, began the arduous task of repairing its shattered structures, the remnants of their once proud city clinging precariously to the higher peaks. The Iron-Bound Orcs, initially enraged by Boren's forceful intervention, grudgingly acknowledged the necessity of cooperation, their engineers already diverting resources to reinforce the crumbling lower levels of their fortress mountain, Grimfang. Even the Aether-Wing Elves, masters of intricate weave magic, focused their efforts on stabilizing the heightened atmospheric pressure, a side effect of their abrupt shift in gravitational control. But beneath the veneer of unity, a palpable tension simmered. The Stone of Null, now the central focus of their combined research, was proving to be far more complex than they initially understood. Kalen, his brow permanently furrowed in concentration, was leading the investigation, his inherent understanding of Riftgate energies proving invaluable. Elara, increasingly attuned to the stone's subtle pulsations, described it as a fractured reflection of Malphas' influence, a constant whisper of the gravity he sought to amplify. Boren, ever the pragmatic engineer, saw it as a containment device, albeit a fragile one. "We've successfully suppressed the immediate effects," he reported to the assembled council, a nervous collection of human strategists, Orcish warlords, and elven counselors, but the echo persists. The stone isn't merely absorbing gravity, it's actively resisting. It's like a gravitational countercurrent. The key breakthrough came unexpectedly, during a prolonged meditation session conducted by Alara within the stone's newly constructed chamber. Driven by a sudden, overwhelming vision, she reported a recurring image Malphas, not merely growing in power, but shifting. He wasn't simply pulling on the world's core, he was experimenting, subtly altering the fundamental laws of physics around himself, trying to create pockets of localized gravity. His learning, Alara said, her voice strained with urgency, his adapting. His not a brute force trying to crush us as a manipulator, shaping the very fabric of reality to his advantage. Kalen, reviewing Alara's report, realized the horrifying implications. The Aegis hooks weren't just a countermeasure against lead sleeves. They were designed to disrupt that specific type of manipulation. Malphas is instinctively reacting to their energy signature, feeding off their attempts to negate his influence. A new directive was issued. The rift gates themselves, once considered a source of power, were now viewed as potential conduits for Malphas' shifting gravity. The Council, under Kalen's direction, began a systematic dismantling of the largest rift gates, channeling their energy into a network of precisely calibrated null beams, aimed not at suppressing gravity, but at disrupting Malphas' localized shifts. This operation drew immediate, unsettling resistance. The very air around the rift gates shimmered with corrupted gravity, creating miniature vortexes that threatened to pull anyone nearby into oblivion. The Iron-Bound Orcs, recalling their earlier experience with the Warlock's gravitational spells, proved instrumental in developing specialized gravity shards, crystalline projectiles that could momentarily disrupt these localized distortions. However, the deeper they delved, the more they realized they were fighting a shadow war. The source of the disturbances wasn't always Malphas himself, but something else. They discovered that the Stone of Null was resonating with remnants of the first architects, the ancient, vanished race who had originally constructed the rift gates, who were said to have wielded even greater control over gravity than Malphas. A particularly chilling discovery was made by Borin, who, while surveying the newly sealed rift gate's core, unearthed a perfectly preserved chamber filled with intricate geometric devices, gravitational tuning forks. He called them crafted from an unknown metal that pulsed with a faint violet light. As he cautiously activated one, a wave of nauseating distortion swept through the chamber, and a distorted, ethereal voice echoed through the room, speaking in a language predating all known tongues. "The anchor is not a prison," the voice hissed. "It is a key to unlocking the true potential of the world and its masters." Suddenly, a blinding pulse of violet light erupted from the Stone of Null, followed by a tremor that shook the entire mountain. The violet shimmer, previously contained, began to expand, no longer just surrounding the stone, but reaching outwards, distorting the surrounding landscape. Kalen yelled, "He's trying to override the null beams. He's not just manipulating gravity, he's manipulating us." The gravity around them shifted violently, then abruptly, everything went silent. The violet shimmer vanished, the tremors ceased, and a palpable sense of dread descended upon the council. The echo in the stone was gone, but in its place, something new had begun to stir. The void anchor, dormant no longer, had begun to subtly, almost imperceptibly, reshape the world around them. Chapter 9, Echoes of the Architect. The silence in the Stone of Null wasn't peaceful. It was the oppressive quiet before a storm, the held breath of a universe on the verge of unraveling. Kalen, his face pale and slick with sweat, felt a sickening pull in his stomach, a sensation of being disassembled and reassembled by forces beyond his comprehension. Borin, ever the pragmatic geologist, was furiously sketching the expanding distortions in the rock face, his charcoal dancing across the parchment with frantic urgency. Lord Arian, the elven archmage, stood motionless, his hand hovering over a glowing glyph of equilibrium, attempting to anchor their senses, but the glyph pulsed erratically, mirroring the instability around them. His learning, Arion finally rasped, his voice strained. Malphas isn't just influencing gravity. He's learning to manipulate the very fabric of reality. The tuning forks, they weren't just tools. They were conduits, amplifying his intent, feeding him knowledge. The violet shimmer had left behind a residue, a faint, buzzing hum that vibrated in their bones. Examining the stone itself, Boren discovered hairline fractures spreading across its surface, lines that resembled complex, geometric equations, as if Malphas had been actively writing with the stone's structure. The voice, it wasn't just a recording, Boren announced, his voice hushed. It was a signature, a remnant of the being that created this place. Suddenly, the air shimmered again, not with violet light, but with a sickly, pulsating green. A section of the chamber began to warp, the rock distorting into impossible angles, forming a perfect sphere within the sphere, radiating a nauseating pressure. From within the green vortex, glyphs began to coalesce, intricate, swirling patterns of a language that was both horrifyingly alien and disturbingly familiar. "He's constructing a conduit!" Kalen shouted, drawing his Feather Knight's blade, a shimmering silver weapon forged with the solidified essence of a fallen storm. "He's building a pathway for something else to enter." The green vortex stabilized, revealing a single crystalline structure within a miniature, rotating world about the size of a man's fist. It spun with terrifying speed, and within its depths, tiny figures, beings of pure geometric light, moved with unnerving precision, meticulously manipulating the miniature planet's gravity fields. "He is building a miniature world," Arion whispered, his eyes wide with dread. "A microcosm of our own reality, manipulated entirely by his will. He's not just trying to shift the anchor, he's trying to control it, to reshape it into a reflection of his own twisted design." As if in response to Arion's words, the miniature world began to shift. The tiny figures accelerated their movements, and the green vortex pulsed violently, showering the chamber with sparks. The very air thickened, becoming heavy and cloying, pressing against their lungs. "The Aegis hooks!" Kalen yelled, remembering the High Lord's desperation. "We need to disrupt his control." "Boren, can you overload the tuning forks?" Boren, ignoring the agonizing shift in gravity that threatened to crush him, frantically adjusted the dials on a smaller, portable tuning fork. He unleashed a concentrated pulse of violet energy, aiming it directly at the green vortex. The effect was immediate, but fleeting. The miniature world shuddered, but the vortex stabilized, the green glow intensified. "It's adapting," Boren yelled, straining against the overwhelming pressure. "He's learned to anticipate." Just then, a voice deeper and more resonant than Malphas had ever been filled the chamber. It wasn't spoken, but felt a cold, intrusive thought that invaded their minds, probing their fears, their hopes, their very existence. "You misunderstand," the voice echoed. "I am not a prisoner. I am the architect. The world is flawed, a chaotic mess of competing forces. I am merely restoring it to its true form, a harmonious balance, dictated by pure, immutable gravity." The miniature world within the green vortex spun faster, the geometric figures growing larger, more defined. As they watched in horror, the miniature planet began to change, its landscape transforming into a jagged, crystalline wasteland, dominated by colossal, gravity-defying structures, impossibly tall spires, and geometric prisons. "He's building a prison for reality itself," Kalen screamed, charging towards the vortex, his blade raised. But before he could reach it, the ground beneath them erupted. A fissure split open in the stone floor, spewing forth a wave of viscous green energy. From the fissure emerged a towering figure, not Malphas, not a construct of his own making, but something older, something far more terrifying. It was a being of pure gravitational energy, a colossal, sentient singularity, its form constantly shifting and reshaping, its eyes burning with an ancient, malevolent light. "Malphas' servant," Arion breathed, his voice filled with grim understanding. He wasn't wielding the anchor. He was awakening him. Chapter 10. The resonance of stone. The air in the obsidian chamber throbbed with residual energy, a sickly green pulse clinging to the walls. The destruction wrought by the awakening, the shattered floor, the grotesque geometry of the miniature world, and the arrival of the being Aryan, identified as Malphas' tool, had silenced the frantic activity of the previous days. Kalen, still gripping his feather knight blade, stood rigid, his face pale and streaked with grime. Beside him, Borin Stonehand, the Orcish mountaineer, meticulously examined the fissure with a frown, his massive hands tracing the contours of the solidified green energy. Elara Silverstream, the wind dancer, floated a few feet above the ground, her eyes closed, attempting to dampen the chaotic resonance that threatened to unravel her very essence. It's a convergence, Elara finally murmured, her voice strained. The anchor isn't just pulling on gravity, it's amplifying it. The energy isn't merely destructive, it's a force, a weight of gravitational manipulation so potent it's reshaping the fundamental structure of this place. The being, whom they now understood was a gravitational echo, a raw manifestation of Malphas will pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, its shifting form occasionally coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes before dissolving back into swirling currents of dark energy. It dwarfed the chamber, easily 30 feet tall, and its presence felt less like a physical threat and more like a profound, unsettling awareness. Malphas was a puppeteer, Borin rumbled, his voice echoing with the weight of his years. He didn't seek to control the anchor, he sought to awaken this resonance. He gestured towards the miniature world with a calloused hand. It's a tuning fork, amplifying the fundamental laws of the universe until they shatter. Suddenly, the miniature planet within the green vortex pulsed violently, the crystalline structures within spiraling wildly. The geometric figures warped and multiplied, coalescing into a single immense spire that pierced through the illusory surface, reaching towards them with terrifying accuracy. "He's accelerating the process," Kalen shouted, lunging forward with his blade, aiming to disrupt the spire's form. But as his blade connected with the shimmering illusion, it vanished, absorbed into the swirling green energy of the echo. The blade itself seemed to weigh differently, heavier, colder. Aryan, regaining his composure, raised a hand, channeling a pulse of aether-weaving magic. "The echo is feeding on our attempts to interfere. It doesn't want to be stopped, it wants to be perfected. We need to disrupt its connection to the anchor, sever the flow." Their plan, hastily conceived in the chaos, was simple in theory: locate the point where the echo's gravitational field intersected with Malphas' anchor and overload it with a counter-resonance. But the echo was proving to be far more intelligent, more adaptive than they had anticipated. "I'm detecting a network," Aryan said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "A latticework of gravitational lines, woven through the very stone of this chamber, connecting the echo to something larger, something beyond Malphas' control." As he spoke, the obsidian chamber began to shift, subtly at first, then with increasing speed. The walls seemed to rearrange themselves, the geometric patterns within the green vortex growing more complex, more unsettling. The echo responded, its form becoming more defined, more deliberate, as if observing their actions with a cold, calculating intelligence. The High Lord's design wasn't merely about trapping gravity, Borin realized, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. He wasn't building a prison. He was building a resonance chamber. A conduit for this thing. He pointed to a section of the floor, now shimmering with an oily green light. The ley lines. He used them deliberately to amplify the anchor's power. Kalen, despite the danger, began to move with a practiced grace, utilizing his feather knight training to navigate the shifting geometry. He identified a nexus of heightened energy, a point where the echo's influence was most concentrated. "There!" he shouted, drawing upon his training to focus his will to rise, create a localized field of diminished gravity around himself. He moved with impossible speed, attempting to reach the nexus, but as he approached, the echo shifted its form, projecting a wave of pure gravitational force that slammed into him, sending him sprawling against the wall.
No.
It's anticipating our moves, Elara cried, desperately weaving a shield of aether wind around herself. We are fighting a force that does not think, but feels the presence of other forces. Just as Kalen struggled to regain his footing, Borin unleashed a torrent of Orcish stormstone, solidified blasts of compressed earth and metal that hammered against the echo, disrupting its form, but ultimately proving ineffective. The echo simply absorbed the impact, its form subtly shifting to accommodate the force, becoming denser, stronger. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. They were not simply battling a weapon, they were battling a force of nature, an ancient malevolent intelligence that had been dormant for millennia, and they were losing. The resonance of stone itself seemed to scream with the echo's power, threatening to shatter their minds and their bodies. The Gravity King's fall was not merely about collapsing cities, it was about a fundamental unraveling of reality, and they were caught in its weight. Chapter 11. The echoes embraced the silence that followed Borin's last. Desperate stormstone barrage was thick, not with the expected roar of the echo, but with the oppressive weight of its presence. Kalen, bruised and bleeding, slowly pushed himself upright, the lingering vibration of the gravity wave still humming through his bones. Elara, her face pale and etched with exhaustion, meticulously dismantled her ether wind shield, the shimmering threads collapsing into nothingness. Borin, his usual boisterous fury replaced with grim determination, inspected the damage to his stormstone forge, a frown twisting his already scarred features. "It's learning," he rumbled, his voice unusually subdued. "It doesn't just react to us. It responds to us. It's like a predator studying its prey." The Nexus, a crumbling spire of obsidian now pulsing with an unsettling violet light, confirmed his assessment. The air around it thrummed with an almost tangible energy, a chaotic symphony of gravitational pressures. The echo itself had subtly shifted, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid form, less a destructive force and more an observation point, its silhouette a swirling vortex of distorted light and shadow. It didn't attack, didn't even appear to notice them, but it knew. It felt their intentions, their desperation, and amplified them back at them. "We're playing into its hands," Elara said, her voice tight with frustration. "We're feeding it power. Every attempt to disrupt it just strengthens its hold. We need to understand why it's so resistant to force. It's not a simple elemental being." Kalen, drawing upon the fragmented memories gleaned from the dying scholars, spoke in a hushed tone. "The texts they refer to it as the Echo, a fragment of the primeval weaver shattered during the sundering. It's not simply gravity, it's the memory of gravity, solidified. A resonance of creation and destruction, trapped and waiting." "Waiting for what?" Borin demanded, hefting a newly forged stormstone hammer. "Waiting to be awakened," Kalen replied, a chilling realization dawning on him. "Malphas isn't just using the echo, he's cultivating it. He's feeding it the weight of our world, our sorrow, our despair. The anchor priests aren't simply exploiting a cosmic anomaly, they're deliberately warping reality." Suddenly, the violet light emanating from the Nexus intensified, bathing the surrounding area in an almost blinding glow. The echo shifted again, and this time, the sensation was different. It wasn't a violent push, but a gentle, insistent pull, as if trying to draw them closer. A low hum resonated through the air, and a wave of nausea washed over them. "It's inviting us," Elara gasped, staggering backward. "It wants us to join it." As if responding to her words, a shimmering tendril of violet energy detached from the echo and snaked towards Kalen. He instinctively raised his hand, channeling his will to rise, creating a momentary shield of diminished gravity around himself. The tendrils struck with unexpected force, not shattering his shield, but wrapping around his arm, constricting him, pulling him inexorably toward the nexus. Kaelin! Ilara screamed, unleashing a torrent of ether wind, desperately attempting to break the connection. Borin, driven by a primal instinct, hurled his stormstone hammer, striking the tendril with a resounding crash, but it only seemed to energize the echo. Just as Kaelin was about to be completely consumed, a flicker of understanding crossed his face. "It's not about resisting," he shouted, his voice strained. "It's about harmonizing. We can't fight its power, we have to resonate with it." He closed his eyes, emptying his mind, pushing aside his fear and his exhaustion. He focused on the feeling of the falling world, the agonizing weight crushing the land, the despair of his people. He didn't try to negate it, he embraced it, allowing himself to become part of the wave, a single resonant note in the symphony of the echo's power. Slowly, miraculously, the violet tendril loosened its grip. The pressure around Kaelin lessened, and he stumbled forward, collapsing onto the obsidian floor, breathing heavily. "It's recognizing us," he gasped. "It's seeing our intent. It's not hostile. It's lonely." The echo pulsed with a brighter light, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Kaelin felt a profound connection, an understanding of the ancient, immeasurable sorrow contained within the core of the world. Then, as quickly as it had come, the connection was severed. The violet light dimmed, and the echo retreated, returning to its observation post, silent and enigmatic. "We've made contact," Ilara said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "But I don't think we understand the implications. We've just communicated with the gravity of a dead god." The realization hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder that their battle was no longer just against Malphas and his treacherous alliance, but against a force far older, far more complex, and potentially far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Chapter 12. The Resonance of Sorrow. The obsidian chamber pulsed with a subdued violet light, a ghostly echo of the echo's terrifying communion. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling with a strange, almost viscous quality. The silence was thick, broken only by the ragged breaths of Kaelin, Ilara, and Master Theron, the grizzled rune-smith who had accompanied them. The victory against Malphas felt brittle, overshadowed by the unsettling encounter with the planet's imprisoned grief. "It's dull." Recognizing us, Kaelin repeated, his voice still laced with the lingering shock. "It's seeing our intent. It's not hostile. It's lonely." Ilara, ever the pragmatist, shook her head slowly. "Lonely is a comforting narrative, Kaelin. We touched a force that shaped this world, a force that suffered. We don't know what it wants, what it's capable of, or what it deems lonely to be." Theron, typically a bastion of stoic observation, ran a trembling hand over the intricate glyphs etched into the floor, the intricate web of runes designed to amplify the echo's signal. "The echo's resonance wasn't merely a broadcast, young Kaelin. It was an invitation, a desperate plea for acknowledgement. The implications are staggering. To converse with the fundamental forces of reality, it's a path of immense, potentially catastrophic power." The memory of the violet tendril reaching out, probing, then withdrawing with a chilling finality, pressed heavily upon Kaelin. He felt a phantom weight on his chest, a resonance of that ancient sorrow. He closed his eyes, attempting to recapture the feeling, to understand the echo's desperate yearning. "We have to resonate with it," he murmured, instinctively channeling his burgeoning ability. He closed his eyes, emptying his mind, pushing aside his fear and his exhaustion. He focused on the feeling of the falling world, the agonizing weight crushing the land, the despair of his people. He didn't try to negate it, He embraced it, allowing himself to become part of the wave, a single resonant note in the symphony of the echo's power. Slowly, miraculously, the violet tendril loosened its grip. The pressure around Kalen lessened, and he stumbled forward, collapsing onto the obsidian floor, breathing heavily. "It's recognizing us," he gasped. "It's seeing our intent. It's not hostile. It's lonely." The echo pulsed with a brighter light, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Kalen felt a profound connection, an understanding of the ancient, immeasurable sorrow contained within the core of the world. Then, as quickly as it had come, the connection was severed. The violet light dimmed, and the echo retreated, returning to its observation post, silent and enigmatic. "We have made contact," Alara said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "But I don't think we understand the implications. We've just communicated with the gravity of a dead god." The realization hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder that their battle was no longer just against Malphas and his treacherous alliance, but against a force far older, far more complex, and potentially far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Suddenly, the runesmith spoke, his voice low and urgent. "I am detecting fluctuations. Subtle, but undeniably present. The echo is attempting to recalibrate." He gestured to the floor runes. The glyphs are resonating with a specific pattern, a cascade of grief, a lament for its own dissolution. And it is amplifying. Before anyone could react, the violet light intensified, no longer a gentle observation, but a focused beam, targeting Kalen directly. He felt a sharp, searing pain as the echo's energy washed over him, not as an intrusion, but as a flood of raw, primordial sorrow. He saw fragmented images, continents shattering, oceans boiling, stars extinguished, the birth and death of worlds, all filtered through the echo's immense, timeless despair. Then he understood. Malphas hadn't just been using the echo to amplify his own power, he had been attempting to feed it, to siphon off its sorrow, to strengthen his control over the collapsing world. The lead gold, the null zone furnace, the Gravity-Weaver's sabotage, they were all tools in a desperate, horrifying attempt to prolong the echo's agony, to turn it into a weapon. As the vision receded, Kalen felt a profound shift within him. The initial fear was replaced by a chilling determination. "We cannot fight it with force," he said, his voice firm. "We must offer it solace." He reached out, instinctively, towards the pulsing violet light. "We will show it that we acknowledge its suffering, that we understand its loneliness. We will offer it a reflection of our own hope, a promise that it is not forgotten." Alara and Theron exchanged a worried glance. This was a perilous gambit, a delicate dance with a force beyond comprehension. But as Kalen continued to extend his hand, a nascent understanding and perhaps a glimmer of redemption bloomed within the heart of the echo. The violet light responded, subtly shifting its focus, as if acknowledging a shared burden, a silent pact forged in the depths of a dying world. Chapter 13. The Offering of Echoes. The air in the weightless peak of Iridian, a spire of shimmering quartz that defied the crushing gravity, hung thick with a nervous energy. For 3 days, Kalen, Alara, and Theron had been attempting to commune with the echo, the source of the world's suffering, a colossal being of sorrow trapped within the void anchor. The initial terrifying revelation that Malphas had been feeding the echo's anguish had hardened into a grim resolve. Now, they stood on the precipice of a ritual unlike any the kingdoms had ever witnessed. The Aegis hooks, painstakingly crafted from Skyreach's purest metal and imbued with anti-gravitic runes, hummed with restrained power. Around them, the assembled forces of the human, Orcish, and Elven armies, a motley collection of exhausted warriors, desperate engineers, and anxious mages, maintained a tense silence. The lead sleeves, once symbols of betrayal, now lay scattered around the central platform, gleaming dully in the violet light emanating from the echo. "The readings are stabilizing," reported Lyra, the Skyreach's chief engineer, her voice tight with concentration. "The flow of gravitational dissonance is decreasing. But it's fragile, Kalen. A single misstep, a discordant thought, could shatter the connection entirely." Kalen, clad in a simple tunic woven with silver threads, continued to extend his hand, his palm open, facing the pulsing violet core. The light responded, not with a violent surge, but with a slow, deliberate expansion, enveloping him in a comforting warmth that felt strangely ancient. He felt the echo's sadness again, not as an overwhelming assault, but as a resonant chord within his own soul, the weight of countless lost worlds, the echo of forgotten dreams. Elara, her wind dancer movements now infused with a cautious grace, chanted in the Etherean tongue, a sequence of intricate harmonies designed to soothe and calm. "We offer our understanding, our empathy. We acknowledge the burden you carry, Echo. We do not judge, we simply remember." Theron, the Orcish mountaineer, stood beside her, his massive frame radiating a quiet strength. He wasn't a mage, not traditionally. Instead, he wielded a meticulously crafted hammer, forged from solidified starlight, a relic of a time when Orcish artisans had attempted to capture fragments of the celestial realm. He began to tap a steady rhythmic beat against the stone beneath his feet, a primal percussion that resonated with the earth's groan and, surprisingly, with the echo's sorrow. "The key, I believe," Theron grunted, his voice surprisingly melodic, "is not to argue with the pain, but to accept it as a part of the whole. To show it we don't seek to erase it, but to hold it alongside us." Suddenly, the violet light intensified, swirling into a vortex that threatened to engulf them. Lyra cried out, "The resonance is spiking! Malphas is attempting to disrupt us." Kalen, bracing himself, focused his will, channeling the combined power of the three kingdoms' magic. He wasn't attempting to fight the echo, but to amplify his offering, a flood of carefully constructed emotions, not denial, but acceptance, not pity, but respect, not fear, but a profound, unwavering sense of shared existence. "We are not your enemy, Echo," he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction that seemed to vibrate through the very stone. "We are merely reflections of your own sorrow, brought together by circumstance. We understand your loneliness, and we offer you our companionship." The vortex subsided, slowing to a gentle swirl. The violet light settled back into a steady pulse, but something had irrevocably shifted. The echo's response wasn't a blinding flash, but a subtle ripple, a feeling of recognition. Then, from the violet core, a single, crystalline shard detached itself and drifted towards Kalen. It pulsed with a light that mirrored his own, not a copy, but an echo, a sympathetic resonance. As the shard brushed against his palm, a torrent of images flooded his mind, no longer fragmented and terrifying, but coherent and beautiful. He saw the creation of the world, the first flowers blooming, the laughter of children, the dance of stars. He saw the echo's origins, a being of immense beauty and sorrow, born from the universe's first spark of pain. It remembers," Kalen whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "It remembers being loved, being valued." As he spoke, Elara and Theron joined him, their hands outstretched, their faces serene. The three armies paused, holding their breath, as the violet light washed over them, filling them with a profound sense of peace. The lead sleeves, inert and lifeless, began to crumble into dust, their purpose finally fulfilled. "It is moving," Lyra gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The gravitational pull. It's lessening." The violet light intensified once more, pushing outwards with an unimaginable force. The air around them shimmered, distorting the landscape. Then, with a sound like the grinding of continents, the void anchor, no longer a suffocating presence, began to rise. Slowly, agonizingly, it detached itself from the core of the world, spiraling upwards into the black void of space. Chapter 14. The Ascent. The silence that followed the Void Anchor's rise was thicker than the violet light, charged with a tension so profound it threatened to shatter the very air. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, a tremor ran through the peaks, not of gravity, but of released potential, of a world suddenly, gloriously free. Kalen, still clutching the crystalline shard now radiating a gentle, calming pulse, found himself acutely aware of the shift. The familiar ache of oppressive weight, a constant companion for the last decade, had vanished. He took a tentative step, then another, feeling the ground beneath his feet, solid and responsive, for the first time in his memory. A choked laugh escaped him, quickly followed by a joyous shout that was instantly echoed by Alara and Theron. It's working!" Lyra exclaimed, her voice raw with disbelief and relief. "The gravitational pull, it's lessening!" The violet light, having served its purpose, began to fade, retracting back into the shard which now lay cool and still in Kalen's hand. Looking down, he saw the remnants of the lead sleeves, the grotesque armor that had represented betrayal and despair were no longer imposing figures, but piles of glittering, useless dust. The very air tasted clean, devoid of the metallic tang of impending doom. "The right of the feather," Theron said, his voice steady, a stark contrast to the frantic terror of the past weeks. It wasn't about overpowering gravity. It was about embracing the inherent yearning for release, for balance. The Iron-Bound Orcs, led by the stoic, scarred veteran, Baruch Stonehand, were the first to react visibly. Years of ingrained aggression seemed to drain away, replaced by a cautious awe. Baruch, a man who'd spent his life fighting for survival against impossible odds, slowly lowered his hand, the brutal hand axe, head wielded with lethal efficiency, now resting on the ground. "The Sky Kings, they were right," he grunted, a rare flicker of respect in his dark eyes. There was more to this world than crushing weight. From the Aether-Wing Elves, under the watchful guidance of the serene Archmage, Lyra Silverleaf, came a chorus of whispered enchantments, weaving new protective wards against the lingering echoes of Malphas influence wards, designed not to restrict, but to guide and stabilize. Their movements were fluid, graceful, born from centuries of attunement with the land. The humans, led by the pragmatic and battle-worn Commander Reese of Skyreach, were the most visibly shaken. The sight of their High Lord, Lord Valerius, reduced to a lifeless husk by his own creation, had been a brutal reminder of their hubris. Yet Reese, despite the lingering grief, moved with a newfound authority. "Secure the peaks," he ordered, his voice firm. "Begin the process of rebuilding. The foundation of Skyreach will not crumble again." As the immediate danger receded, a palpable sense of camaraderie began to emerge between the three kingdoms. The war of the high ground, fueled by desperation and mistrust, seemed a distant, horrifying memory. A tentative truce was declared, marked by a simple exchange of oaths of mutual defense, oaths of shared responsibility for the ravaged lands, and, surprisingly, oaths of respect for the Echo's existence. But the lifting of the Void Anchor didn't immediately return the world to its pre-cataclysm state. The damage was profound. Vast swaths of land were still warped and twisted, scarred by the unnatural pressures. Rivers flowed uphill, mountains had fractured, and vast pockets of the earth remained unnaturally dense, exhibiting localized gravitational anomalies. "The core hasn't fully stabilized," Lyra announced, after meticulously scanning the area with her magic. "There are pockets of lingering influence, subtle distortions. We need to understand them, predict their effects." It was then that Kalen, guided by the shard's memory, made a startling suggestion. "The Echoate remembers the creation of this world. It can Guide us. The idea was met with initial skepticism, but Kalen's unwavering conviction, coupled with the shard's continued pulse of gentle energy, persuaded them. They began to experiment, focusing their combined magical energies, Kalen drawing on the echo's resonance, Lyra utilizing her expertise in ley line manipulation, and Theron channeling the raw, untamed power of the peaks to pinpoint the source of the distortions. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to identify areas of concentrated gravitational instability, pockets of raw, chaotic energy that pulsed with the faintest echo of Malphas. They discovered that the lead sleeves hadn't just been about physical strength, they had actively suppressed the natural forces of the peaks, creating these distortions. As they worked, a small scouting party led by Baruch Stonehand and Rees of Skyreach stumbled upon a horrifying discovery, a vast network of subterranean tunnels, carved not by natural forces, but by the anchor priests themselves. These tunnels weren't built for defense, they were designed to amplify the Void Anchor's influence, to ensure that Malphas' grip on the world would never be loosened. They were preparing for a second fall, Rees growled, his hand instinctively gripping his sword. They never intended for us to succeed. The realization hung heavy in the air. The ascent of the Void Anchor had been a victory, but it was only the first step. The threat of Malphas, the Heavy, remained, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to reassert its dominion. The Gravity King's fall had ended one battle, but a far more insidious war had just begun. Chapter 15. The Veins of the Stone. The air in the thronehold of Viridian, the capital of the Aether-Wing Elves, tasted of ozone and despair. Rain, unnaturally dense and heavy, hammered against the crystal spires, a relentless reminder of the world's oppressive weight. Kalen, the Echo Singer, sat hunched over a complex array of rune-etched obsidian, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers tracing the patterns with agonizing slowness. Across the chamber, Lyra, the Gravity-Weaver, was meticulously studying a shimmering map woven from captured ley lines, her movements precise and deliberate. Beside her, Theron, the Mountaineer, a mountain of scarred muscle and grim determination, sharpened his axe, the metallic rasp, a counterpoint to the storm's fury. They had spent weeks deciphering the chaotic signals emanating from the peaks, tirelessly pinpointing the locations of Malphas' influence. The discovery of the subterranean tunnels by Borog and Rees had shifted the burden of the investigation from a desperate scramble to understand the anomaly to a chilling realization. The anchor priests hadn't merely succumbed to Malphas, they'd been actively cultivating his power. The tunnels are perfectly engineered, Lyra stated, her voice laced with a rare tremor. Not organic, not sculpted by the earth. They resonate with a deliberate dissonance, a focus of gravitational energy far beyond anything we've encountered. It's like a monstrous vein, pumping Malphas' influence directly into the heart of the world. Kalen, pausing his rhythmic chanting, added, "The echoes speak of a specific frequency, a harmonic convergence." The anchor priests weren't just amplifying the void anchor, they were deliberately shaping it, directing its pull. They were building a throne for Malphas. Theron, typically a man of few words, grunted. And we walked right into their plan. They knew we'd follow the distortions, that we'd chase the signal. He hefted his axe, the gesture laden with frustrated aggression. It's like a trap, wider and deeper than any we've imagined. A flicker of movement caught Kalen's eye. A young scout, Alara, breathless and soaked to the bone, burst into the chamber, carrying a small, intricately carved stone tablet. "Lord Kalen, we've found something remarkable." The tablet, cool to the touch, pulsed with a faint internal light. Etched upon its surface were diagrams not of tunnels, but of the lead sleeves themselves, overlaid with complex geometric patterns. "These aren't schematics for the armor," Lyra exclaimed, peering at the tablet with growing intensity. "These are resonance mapping. They're showing how the Anchor Priests were actively suppressing the peak's natural energy, creating zones of amplified gravitational instability. They weren't just wearing lead, they were creating the problem. As she spoke, a chilling deduction formed in Theron's mind. The lead sleeves, they weren't protecting them from the gravity. They were controlling it. They were creating pockets of inverted gravity, pockets of null space, to conceal their actions. A wave of understanding washed over the three. The seemingly random collapses, the sudden shifts in the peak's gravitational fields, the deliberate sabotage of the Levitation Engines. It wasn't a desperate struggle. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign, driven by the Anchor Priest's insidious manipulation. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the thronehold, escalating in intensity. The obsidian runes surrounding Kalen's instrument pulsed violently, and the shimmering ley lines woven by Lyra began to unravel, spiraling into chaotic knots. "Malphas is aware!" Kalen shouted, struggling to maintain control of the echo. "Has responding to our investigation. The tunnels, they're not just conduits, they're amplifying his will. He's trying to consume us." Through the chaotic din, Theron, relying on instinct honed by years spent navigating the treacherous peaks, shouted, "We need to cut him off at the source. Those tunnels, we need to find the nexus." The realization settled upon them with crushing weight. The war of the high ground wasn't just about survival, it was a desperate race against a sentient geological force determined to reshape the world in its own image. The Gravity King's fall had merely opened the door. Now, they had to confront the monstrous architecture of his ambition, before it completely swallowed them whole. Their task, it became clear, wasn't just about lifting the weight of the world, but about dismantling the very foundations of Malphas' dominion.